every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated. Yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk.
Hello, I'm Granger Forson, and on this week's episode of ScaleUp Radio, I'm speaking to Terry Malloy and Phil Joseph from The Human Business. The Human Business are unlike any other organisations we've had before on ScaleUp Radio. The Human Business advocates for a more human way of tackling the challenges in businesses, working with businesses and organisations that work towards wellness and humanitarian causes rather than just pursuit of profit. Don't be fooled though. Phil and Terry make sure to bring a great sense of humour to what they do, which you'll hear more of in our conversation. It really was a wide-ranging conversation between the three of us, and we covered a lot of ground, including just what it takes for a business to be a human business. It's not just for charities or not-for-profit organisations. How to create a process to deal with how to react to your business and the behaviours of businesses around you. And that honesty and integrity are far more important in running a successful business than many people would have you believe. As I said, the human business isn't like anything else we've covered on ScaleUp Radio, and I can really recommend this conversation. I know you'll have plenty of takeaways from this episode. Let's go and speak with Terry and Phil. Hello, Terry Malloy and Phil Joseph, and welcome to ScaleUp Radio. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our audience?
Hello, I'm Terry Malloy. I'm co-founding director of The Human Business.
And I'm Phil Joseph, and I'm the other director of The Human Business.
Brilliant. So, gentlemen, take us through what is The Human Business? Tell us about it.
So the interesting thing about a human business is we call the company The Human Business, but we're advocating for the idea of a human business. So our business, being The Human Business, advocates for a more human-centric way of tackling the challenges that exist in business. The definition of a human business is a business that puts human wellness and human connection at the heart of the decision-making process so that a business can achieve sustainable outcomes to the contributions it wants to make.
And we describe the sort of people we work with as a purpose-driven business. And it doesn't actually matter what size they are, but they're businesses that are not purely focused on profit. They're interested in their people primarily, and then the planet, and then the profit that will be created by working with the other two.
And you call it an accreditation from your website. So what do you mean by that in terms of its structure?
We have an accreditation scheme where we award what we call a care label. And this care label, it looks a little bit like a laundry tag. So there is a little bit of humor in it. That's a very important part of our business. So on the tag, it will say things like colors and sizes may vary. Human being needs to be handled with care, that sort of thing. But basically, we award this care label after people have gone through an accreditation training course. And this is delivered remotely on Zoom so that people do it in their own time over a set period of weeks. And then it culminates in a half-day workshop where we bring everybody back together. And then they pledge to uphold the values and principles of a human business.
So it's an accreditation with a training scheme. It's a focus of creating other businesses to have the humans at the heart of it. So where did this come from? How did you start, and where are you on your journey?
So I suppose the truthful answer is the idea came to me about 20 years ago when I left commercial banking. And I realized at that time that there was a lot of movement towards creating what they were calling employee engagement. It seemed to be something that was the flavor of the month. But there wasn't a lot of genuine application in terms of how do you engage your workforce. In that intervening 20 years, UK PLC has moved forward, society's moved forward, and there seems to be a much greater call for businesses to be more responsible, to put people and planet before the simple pursuit of profit. I mean, profit is important, but it's the pursuit of profit over everything else, which seems to be much more in people's mindset. We've got to have more balance. So I suppose we ended up about just before the pandemic thinking about how could we create a more sustainable way of doing business. Now, we don't consider ourselves to be training companies or training companies. There's plenty of great training companies out there. What we wanted to do was to find a way of helping those businesses that wanted to be recognized as caring about people and planet before profit. How could we give them some sort of identifier, some sort of accreditation that said, in a world full of marketing hype, you can trust us to genuinely care about people and planet before profit. So the accreditation we've designed is designed to actually put everybody who goes through it on a level playing field and be held accountable because they want to be held accountable to it. There's been a lot of talk in the last 18 months, I suppose, of this idea of unconscious bias. So people who pledge to want to be classified as a human business are open to the fact that they might be blindsided by some of their actions and behaviors, but they aspire to be held accountable for living to a certain set of values and principles. So it makes it much more of a community of businesses who are saying, please hold me accountable to this. This is important to us. And that's not for everybody, but for those that feel it's important to them, the way in which they do business, we wanted to be able to provide some framework and some recognition that they're different from the rest of the crowd.
And the interesting thing there for me is, Terry talks about what he was experiencing way back 20 years ago when he was in the bank. So when we came up with this challenge of we'd like to put human into 1 million UK businesses, I immediately said, I'd like to put human back into 1 million UK businesses, because I firmly believe that up until the mid-80s, we did act in a more human way. And then in the 80s, the pursuit of profit pushed everything out of the way for 2 or 3 generations of working people. And now there are, I think, 2 or maybe even 3 generations that just aren't prepared to think and work that way. They don't want to live in that way where profit comes in front of everything, where they drive themselves with ridiculous hours and sacrifice other parts of their life. So for me, it's a case of going back to some of the values, which may seem a little old-fashioned to some people, but some of those values that I believe were in place up until the late 80s. So it's a big number, but the number is based on some facts that about the business community in the UK. And I can't do those numbers. Terry knows them really well. But, you know, it's not just a random figure pulled out of the air, even though when Terry suggested it, it did scare me to death. But so,
yeah,
I you know, there has definitely been a generational change, and that change has been driven even harder by what we all experienced during the pandemic. And as I say, for an awful lot of people, if you look at the people that were able to work from home, and that is a bit of a privilege. I know that a lot of people can't do their job from home, but you look at the people that were working from home who are now being told to go back into the office because that's the only way they can work efficiently and hit their targets. And they're saying, well, hang on a minute, who was doing all the work over the last 2 years? So all of these things, you know, come together. So there's definitely a change afoot in what people want. And I think of a greater understanding for a lot of people of what they don't want.
Right. Yes. So, give us a bit more of a description in terms of your accreditation, your approach to helping a business maybe understand how to put humans and planet before profit.
So, what we've done with the accreditation, we've created a framework. And apart from the framework, we don't claim any unique element of it. This is a lot of accepted business wisdom, and indeed a lot that you're doing in BizSmart fits into the framework. But if I can describe the framework like a house, right? And if you think of a business, it's just a building in one sense, but the people inside the business create the community that is the business, creates the company that is the business. So the roof of the house, we define that's the contribution. That's what the business exists to contribute to society. And I say society because profit, if that's what you think you exist to do, that's an outcome of the way in which you run your business. So we think in terms of the roof being the contribution our business exists to provide. The purpose, people might say. So then, as with any house, you have foundations. And there are certain foundations that you need to put in place. We think of those foundations in terms of 4 paired values. And the first of those paired values is kindness and respect. And we would ask anybody the question, who doesn't want to be on the receiving end of kindness and respect? There are some people, they're called psychopaths and sociopaths, but generally speaking, human beings like to be on the receiving end of kindness and respect. And the second paired value is openness and honesty. And again, if you ask yourself the question, who doesn't want to be on the end of open and honest communication? Couched in kindness and respect, because openness and honesty without kindness and respect is just bullying. So if those first paired values, everybody wants to be on the receiving end, the question is, well, why don't we get more of that in business? And so there's a barrier. And the third principle is the first part of it, and it requires people to be courageous and vulnerable. So the fourth step for us is acting with courage and vulnerability. And that's really important. But if you think of it almost like as a shield, if you know people generally want to be on the receiving end of kindness and respect and openness and honesty, you might feel vulnerable in sharing stuff, and it might require courage to share it. But people want to hear it. Right? They might not like what they're going to hear, but they want to hear it. And then the fourth step is curiosity and gratitude, which might seem like a strange pairing of values, but in our experience, curiosity keeps an open mindset. And being grateful when somebody responds to you and is open and honest and in a kind and respectful way, to be grateful for what they say to you actually is kind of fundamental. Even as business owners, how can we grow our businesses? How can we improve if people don't give us feedback? So what we hear might not be easy to hear, but we have to be grateful. So developing that blend of curiosity, those four paired values, what that does is create connection. It creates a genuine connection between human beings, right? People feel as though I've found somebody I'm having a conversation with who gets me, right? And connection is the first principle of a human business. So you've gone through four paired values. The first principle is connection. The second principle, which is almost a byproduct of feeling you've created connection, is engagement. I am interested in you as a person. If I'm interested in you, you're probably interested in me. That's that level of engagement. And when I mentioned earlier about that in the 80s, people wanting employee engagement is the key thing. What creates engagement is that you created genuine connections and people feel as though you care about me, right? When people feel as though that happened, you have this sense of I belong, right? And that's what the first two principles of a human business do, makes you feel as though you belong somewhere. And when people belong, they feel psychologically safe. And what naturally happens then, if you feel safe, is you share things. You share all the things that you think would protect you because you feel as though you need to.
I just wanted to expand on one of those things. When you've gone through that staircase of principles, of shared values, to get to those principles, and you have a connection that's really trusted, then you can have open and honest conversations with kindness and respect. So the working relationship that Terry and I have, and that also we have with you, Granger, is that if we do something that's outside of what you would think would be our normal good behavior, we want you to come and tell us. So we want you to have the courage and the vulnerability to say, hey, Phil, you know what you just said in that conversation with Terry? That really wasn't your finest hour. And because you have a relationship built on trust, I can accept that, what some people might see as criticism, I can accept that with gratitude. So that's where the connection of curiosity and gratitude comes from. So I'm curious to know what you think. And I genuinely want your opinion because it might help me improve on something. And I mean, this is the basis of conversations that we've had with you, Granger, and Terry and I have almost daily. In fact, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. So when you've built that deep connection that is built on trust, and you know where people are coming from with kindness and respect and openness and honesty, and they're showing courage and vulnerability, that's where the gratitude comes in. And it just makes everything easier to deal with. In business and in life, we all have occasions where we have to have difficult conversations. And a lot of us will try and push those conversations away or bury them or somehow put them out there in an angry or, challenging way. And that really isn't the way forward. If you're developing these shared values and these principles, you can have a difficult conversation, still respect the other person's view, and not fall out. And that's really what we're trying to encourage all the people we work with to be able to build the relationships and the trust that enables them to act in that way, rather than coming up with the snap emotional response, which very often just makes things worse.
So in terms of, for me, then an individual moves through life through growing. So we need to grow. It is a fundamental thing that we all have, from when we're a baby to a child to a teenager, even into adulthood. And somehow along the lines, we often lose that. But growth is a so important thing. But growth only comes when you have psychological safety. And within the psychological safety, growth comes when you are challenged, because if you can challenge yourself, okay, but very few people can. Challenge needs to come from the external world. So you need that psychological safety to make that happen. So your accreditation process is developing the leaders in the business and the people that interface between businesses to have that safe space so they can grow that trust, so we can all help our own growth and development.
And I think another thing that happens through childhood into adulthood is that the value of curiosity is devalued. That ridiculous statement, curiosity killed the cat. No, it didn't. The cat got run over. It didn't die because it was curious. Yeah. So, as humans, we start with a massive level of curiosity. It's how we learn anything. And I think through the education system, that curiosity gets knocked out of us. It's discouraged. And if you're not curious about things, nothing new is ever going to happen. And just look at all the exciting stuff you might be missing because you don't have your eyes open. So, I keep coming back to this curiosity thing. Somebody we worked with a couple of months ago now said, what would you describe as your greatest attribute, your biggest character thing that you think is important? And I said straight away, curiosity. I'm constantly curious about everything. And certainly in my teens in school, that was considered a bad thing. So let's go with the curiosity, please.
Where curiosity might be squeezed out of the education system, it's because there's a cookie cutter approach. You're here to learn a certain bit of information, and if your answer falls outside of that, then it's not needed. So that's where we're trying to get that conformity. But if I go back to the point I made earlier about engagement, full engagement is when you show up with every part of you. And that requires you to feel safe in order to try things which might not work. So there's a degree to which their curiosity allows you to feel as though I can experiment with something. It may or may not work, but if it does, it's probably actually going to be of advantage to the endeavor at hand.
Yeah.
And I think as a leader, trusting your people isn't always just about, can I trust them to do the work? It's actually, can I trust them to fail and know that they can grow and learn from that? Yeah, not they're going to get berated by me because they failed, but actually I will help them understand the failure, and they can learn from the failure and move forward, because people will make mistakes. It's how you as a leader create the environment to allow that mistake to be a growing opportunity rather than a berating opportunity.
Yeah, and all of those things, why we call it a human business is that however inconvenient the truth, humans don't work like machines. Right? We're illogical, we're emotional, right? And therefore built into the human is the possibility that we're not going to act the way in which people would expect us to act. And as soon as we therefore as leaders try to push the humans around us back into conformity, then we're actually cutting off a part of the essence of who they are. Now, it has to be channeled into something productive, but if people aren't performing in the way in which you would expect them to perform, our belief is they don't understand something. They're fighting against something that in their mind makes absolute logical sense. And unless we as business leaders want to explore what that is and have that different perspective shared with us, then we're never actually going to tap into the fullness of the people that we have around us.
So you've developed this amazing model and an accreditation scheme that comes out of it as an approach in terms of what you're trying to do. You set this fantastic goal of putting the human back into 1 million businesses in the UK. How are you going to go about that? What are your plans?
So let me first of all pick up what Phil said earlier about where does the million come from? Because yes, it is a nice round number with a lot of zeros. It comes from two things. First of all, a big, hairy, audacious goal that you feel scares you enough, right? And this certainly scared me enough. And when I shared it with Phil, he was
scared me even more.
And I explained to him where it comes from. And there are 5.9 million UK businesses. 4.9 of them are what are classified as SMEs, so small, medium enterprises. But if you break up that 4.9 million SMEs, 97% of them are 10 employees or less. So actually, as a country, we are literally a nation of shopkeepers. We are a nation of small businesses. But all of the media, it focuses on larger companies. And that to me is really, it's optimistic and it's empowering, because it means that most of us in the SME market can make a huge difference to the people that we do business with. And if you were to look at that 4.9 million, there's a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And he puts forward an argument that when you reach 18% of an audience, you reach a tipping point and something becomes the norm. And the figure of 1 million is 18% of the SME market. So the idea was, if you reach 1 million people in the UK market, you reach a tipping point to the idea that that's just the way we do business. We care about people and planet before the simple pursuit of profit. So in answer to your then second question, which was how are we going to reach 1 million, probably not in my lifetime.
And definitely not in mine.
but in Simon Sinek's language of the infinite game, it feels like a worthy cause to spend the rest of my working life involved in the pursuit of, and hopefully somebody else will come up and decide, can we carry on this, after you've finished? The fundamental structure, though, is, again, following another principle called pay it forward, where one person finds 3 people who believes in the same thing. And that's a triangle. It's the most secure and solid geometric shape that exists, right? So if you created the business in 3s, so we have 10 people who've gone through our soft launch accreditation, you're one of them, Granger. If each of those 10 found 3 people that they could introduce who wanted to then go through the accreditation, we'd have 40 people. If that 30 found another 3, we'd have 90 new people, we'd have 130. The real magic about those numbers is if you go down 11 levels, you get 1 million. So it really is a question of, it's not about chasing the number, it's about chasing the people who believe in it and who want to be held accountable. But the magic is, it's a slow start, but then it's like a hockey stick. The numbers could grow exponentially, which is in a way why we're talking with BizSmart, because we knew from the get-go that if we adopted that approach, we're going to have to scale up. So it was really fortuitous that you approached us in January of this year. And the strange thing about, if we look at the principles of the human business, we have put that into the relationship that you and I have, Granger. And I think it was last week, it might have been the week before. It all blurs into one for me. But we had a conversation, and I thought it was 2 years I've known you. And you said, no, it's January of this year. So in 9 months, by following these principles, the connection we've created feels as though I've known you so much longer than other people. And so it's fortuitous. As I say, 9 months ago, you met us just as we had finished the first pilot of the accreditation. And Phil and I were reviewing it and going, we need to find how we can scale this, because this could take off. And if it takes off, we'll never have the time to put into place the processes that are necessary. And principle 4 of a human business, after sharing, is it has to be sustainable. And so, I think God has a wonderful sense of humor when if you get out the way, he puts you into contact with people who are exactly the people you're looking for. And yourself and the principles within Bismarck and scaling up were definitely what we were looking at 9 months ago and are continuing to look at.
And the interesting thing for me was we, round about the time we met you, we thought we'd created a business. And we had a conversation with somebody, which also you joined in with, that said, actually, what you've created is a really great product, but that's not the business. And I said, yes, it is. We've been working on this for 2 years. And then suddenly thought, yeah, actually, we have created this lovely, beautiful baby, and it's all tied up with a bow and it's ready to go. But actually, if this took off in the way we'd hoped, we can't support it. We're not ready. We don't have the systems in place. So we've spent most of this year working out on how we can make that growth, which is slow to start with, how we can make it sustainable, so that we can make the biggest contribution. So we are definitely in need of help to scale up, rather than just having this sort of scattergun approach, which has never been what we've wanted. We always want people to get introduced by people that already know what we do. So this is where Terry's talking about the 3 invite 3 invite 3 invite 3 thing. So we're not looking for people to beat a path to our door. We want it to be out there for people that have an understanding that there's something missing or there's something they want. And that's why it's so important that we talk about the huge percentage of UK businesses that are less than 10. And even within that chunk, there's a massive percentage that are 1 or 2 in the way that we are. So it's the solopreneurs and the micro businesses, as they rather insultingly call us, that are actually fueling the economy. We are the ones doing the work, and part of what we want to achieve with the accreditation is to give people an opportunity to be recognized that not only are they working hard to do whatever it is they're doing, but they're doing it in this human way. So it's Terry described this as a badge of honor. At first that sounded like one of those cheap little sort of things you pin on and says it's my birthday, but it's not that kind of badge, but it is a badge of honor, that acknowledges that you might already be a human business. You might already be doing brilliant things, but nobody's recognizing you as different from perhaps another business in the same town that appears to do the same thing, but is doing it in a completely contradictory way to the way we would encourage people to work.
Yes, and that's very much the idea of, we live in a world of marketing hype. Words are cheap, right? And I think sitting right at the heart of our idea of a human business and the accreditation is to create a marketplace. It's a marketplace of businesses who've gone through a common process. So if you're looking for a certain service, is it in the marketplace? Is there already somebody who's gone through the process that is accredited that you can implicitly trust to operate from a certain set of values and wants to be held accountable to that? That's what's really important. That's what's exciting. And I do like the idea of it being one of my favorite podcasts is The Diary of a CEO. And Stephen Bartlett says at the beginning, I hope nobody's listening, but if you are, please keep this to yourself. And it's almost the same thing. You know, I hope nobody knows about the human business, but if you do, you know, keep it to yourself. Because if we make it something that people who are members want to protect the integrity of, then it really will become something special. And that's why it's not about chasing the numbers. It's about chasing the people who share the similar values, because then you can have the difficult conversations, but maintain the integrity of what it is that we're trying to create.
Yes. And I, I'll stand up in terms of, you and I have had discussions, and you came along to one of my free training events in my passion for 2-second lean, and you gave me some very good feedback, very constructive feedback about my presentation and how I could improve it and take it forward. And if we didn't have that relationship, there's no way I would have accepted that or even thought about that in terms of doing things.
I think what you're illustrating there, Granger, is if you've gone through a process and you feel psychologically safe, you feel psychologically safe because you know the person talking to you cares about you. They're not trying to score points. They're not trying to lord themselves over you. They're sharing because they feel as though they have something that will enable you to achieve what it is you want.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally different to giving feedback for the sake of, well, look how clever I am to point this out. It's feedback designed to help somebody grow, not to show how impressive you are. And I'd have to own for myself most of my adult life. And so I'm 64. And when I say most of my adult life, I mean up until I was 62. Feedback was something you accepted you had to have, but I hated it. I absolutely hated it because it felt as though it attacked the very essence of who I am to be perfect, which nobody is. But for 62 years, I was convinced I could achieve that. But a couple of years ago, I came across a phrase, and I don't know whether it's properly attributed to Adam Grant or whether it's attributed to Brené Brown, but the phrase was, I'm not here to be perfect, I'm here to get it right. Or I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. And when I heard that, it was like all the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. And how arrogant does that sound? But it was like, I don't have to be right. But if somebody points something out to me where it can be better, and I could do something better that would achieve the same outcome, it's like, bring it on. And since that moment, I've never felt sensitive about receiving feedback. So if anybody listening to this podcast has got feedback to give to me, I'm open to having that concept challenged, because it really is that important to me that I stay true to, how do I get it right? How do we get the mission of a human business as clear as we possibly can, so that the community can grow and be of service to, service to the world, service to the UK.
And again, just going back onto our SMEs, which I'm really passionate about, how many SMEs have got somebody they can share with in a non-competitive and a non-judgmental way, in the way that Terry's just talking about? We get feedback now all the time from the events we run. And yes, we discuss it together. And if there was something that would trigger something in Terry or myself, we'll talk about it and perhaps have a little smile and say, well, get over it. You asked for feedback, you've got it. And there's something in there we can action. And I think a lot of small business people don't have that. And then if you add that into that, the pressure of not wanting to take that rubbish bit home, because we all take stuff home and we all take home into work. It doesn't matter what people say. We're all just humans, and it doesn't matter which arena we're in. The other arena affects it. So, how many small businesses have that? How many small businesses even have a partner or a member of staff in their business that they can do that with? Very few. Yeah. Very few. And that would imagine the change that would make when you enable people to start thinking and acting that way. That's really exciting, the difference that can make.
And I'd add to that, Phil, because you made the point. If I put that into like traditional business networking, everybody goes there and meets people, but we're all wearing a certain mask or a certain set of clothes.
A suit of armor, I used to describe it. Yes.
But and I'm not saying it to decry networking. What I'm doing is trying to create a distinction between the connections that you might make when you go out and meet people in business networking is different to the connection that we're talking about in a human business community, because it's not about trying to pitch who you are. It's about trying to become the best version of who you are, so you can actually do business in the best possible way.
Yeah. So you've said, you've been going now for 2 years in terms of doing things, in terms of your development. You've been focusing on the product, and you've realized that in terms of you now need to focus on the business. So let's just ask a few sort of things about the business. So you are a micro business, you're a very small business. How do you manage not getting overwhelmed?
I'm going to let Terry go first on that.
And I was just going to say, I'll let you go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No, I'll answer it first. So probably up until about April of this year, I was running 2 businesses. So the business that actually generates my monthly income, and the business we're developing, the human business. When Phil and I set up the company, the thing that was really important to us, because it was going to be something different, is I didn't want us to saddle a new business with a need to generate a certain level of income from day one. It needed, particularly with the idea of growing by recommendation and by growing by people who really wanted to be part of the mission, I needed to be able to make sure that financially I could support myself some other way. So I have another job. And it was in April, when Phil was celebrating his birthday, that I suddenly realized I'm running 2 businesses, and that's unsustainable. And it's like hidden in plain view, principle 4 of a human business, it has to be sustainable. I was building a human business from an unsustainable manner. So probably since April, I've paid more attention to how many hours a week I can put into the human business. And so the key part to that, to me, is this idea of what does done look like? It might not be what I would like it to look like, but on the basis that I only have 10 or 15 hours this week to devote to the human business, what does done look like? And I'm much more balanced now than I've ever been in my working life. Although I have two challenging jobs, I love them both, but I've balanced my time so that I feel as though I have a personal life as well.
Yeah. And just before Phil, just before you answer that question, just go back to Terry. So you use this word done. So you're using the sort of expression as done is better than perfect, or what do you mean by done? It's a great
done concept. Is better than, exactly right, Granger. Done is better than perfect. I think I was definitely in previous businesses and in life, that level of perfectionism delayed doing something. And it comes from that old mantra, you only get one chance to make a good impression.
Mm.
And it's true in one sense, but it also, I think, I'll own it for myself, has been a huge blocker from actually just getting out and trying to build something and see how it goes. And I mean, some of the questions that you couldn't have possibly, if you'd have locked me in a padded room for 5 years, I would not have come up with some of the questions that you've asked. So it illustrates that we grow businesses collaboratively. We grow businesses by testing the ideas out and talking to people. And Phil and I have, we've shared a video with people in our monthly meeting called Where Do Great Ideas Come From? It's a TED Talk, and there's a guy called Stephen Johnson who did the TED Talk. And great ideas, he put a case forward, come from coffee shops. And it comes from the coffee shop revolution of that period of enlightenment. But he jokingly said they come from the coffee shops because up until then, everybody was drunk on gin. And then when they moved to coffee, everybody had a stimulant and was like wide awake. But in coffee shops, people came to talk. And it was the exchanging of ideas that actually made people go, oh, I thought about that. And I could do this. And then ideas just began to take shape. So kind of within that idea of a human business, human beings, when they feel psychologically safe, they are inherently creative. And it's the businesses where your staff feel safe that are going to actually be the most successful, because they'll be creative to overcome the problems that businesses are facing in a rapidly changing world.
Yeah, I love that coffee shop story, even though it goes back to 1700 and something. But you could
that's just about remember that, couldn't you, Phil?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't there for the first time round, but certainly shortly after that. But what that's about, where that connects with our principles, is this idea of sharing. So somebody comes along to the coffee shop, and I was in a coffee shop this morning with Terry and a whole bunch of people. Somebody come along to a coffee shop and they feel safe and they feel liked and they feel known. And they say, hey, I've got this great idea. What do you think of it? Knowing that one or two people might think that's absolute rubbish, but there'll be somebody there will say, well, I don't know. I've never seen anything like that before. Let's give it a go. And you try it and you tweak it and it might fail. And that sends you off to try it again. And this is the way that researchers work and scientists work and engineers work. So we'll try this and then we'll try a tweak and then we'll try that and it might work and it might not. And out of that will come something that works and that is sustainable. So really, really at the core, I mean, somebody asked me what was at the core of our business this morning, and I said it's connection. It's just trying to help as many people as possible connect in an honest, truthful, full way through trust. Yeah. And out of that comes stuff. And I can't tell you what the stuff is. I can just tell you that it will be interesting. So if it's interesting, I'm curious about it. And there we go. We're back to curiosity again. So just get people together. And they will, if they like each other and they trust each other, they will come up with ideas and they'll share them openly.
And that trust is the idea that they're not going to steal your idea. Yeah. Because, the business world is filled full of ideas, filled full of the mindset that if I don't patent this, if I haven't got it locked down before I start talking about it, somebody with deeper pockets is going to steal my idea, and then I've lost it. But our experience is that when you bring people together who create a deeper, more meaningful connection, they're not looking to steal your idea. They've got their own ideas. What they're happy to do, though, is give you maybe some thoughts about how you could improve your idea. And that's a totally different community to be part of.
So Phil, your turn to answer the question. How do you stop being overwhelmed in the business or by the business?
I've got a very active social life that I'm not prepared to sacrifice. Well, I do very, very occasionally. So, things happen on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday, and they happen. And I'm sorry, whatever's going on in the business stops at whatever time it is. The great benefit that I get out of working with Terry is that we are very, very different animals and we think in different ways. So Terry will look at all kinds of stuff and find all sorts of interesting things and bring them to me. And my first thought is, have we got time? Have we got time for this? And based on what he was saying about there was a change in his mindset back in the spring, and that put us in a position where we need to say, right, it's not just that Phil needs to do more. It needs to be, this is my portion, that is your portion. Stop overthinking about mine. So Terry will tell you, and he often says it, that he's a recovering people pleaser. I'd like to think I've helped him in that recovery journey. I know I have. And so, so I joked with someone the other day. I said, so Terry gets on Zoom with me and tells me about this lovely thing he's seen and this wonderful idea. And then he looks to see what kind of face I'm pulling. Now, we're on audio today, so that doesn't count, thank goodness, because I am smiling. But going back to that business of having somebody you can share with.
Yeah.
So we are moving the business forward by recognizing what we can't do right now. We know what we need to have in place to be able to do the stuff that we want to do. And that means, to have the extra resources that we need to make the business more efficient and to support the business as the numbers grow. And there is a plan, and the plan, the deadlines do move depending on what's happened today. And as you know, we had a very good example where we had to postpone something recently, and that's put some of the stuff we're going to do back 3 months.
Yeah.
But having made the decision based on a set of values and principles and being concerned whether people would accept it, the reaction was fantastic. Yes, that was the right decision. Now we've got more time. It'll be an even better event when we get to it. And there was that great sigh of relief where you say, actually, that was a bit scary, but now I can see we did the right thing. And again, you're back to trust. You're back to trust. So, that when I said earlier, the value of a small business owner, I have my own business, the same as Terry has his own business. And, to have somebody I can talk to that is not a competitor, not in the same business, nothing like me, if you like, a whole set of different experiences. That's massively valued to anybody. And you have this in your business. You've got people you can talk to within the business. And now with the relationship we've got, you can talk to us. So that's what we're trying to build for as many people as possible.
Excellent. It's been really great discussion. A couple more questions before we run out of time. So the first one really, so you've been talking about the relationship between the two of you and the roles that you play within the business. How do you keep each other, aligned in terms of make sure you're doing the right thing for the business moving forwards?
That's probably the easier part. When we both agreed what the values were, we both decided we would hold each other accountable to it. And I think maybe a couple of years ago, Phil, we had something had happened, and I had to have a conversation with you about it. I know
it was 3 years ago in June. Would you like me to tell you the exact date? Because I can.
Yeah.
On you go, Terry.
And I was really scared to have the conversation, but it was like, well, we signed up to this, and if I can't have the conversation, the difficult conversation, which might have meant Phil going, well, forget it then. We'll wrap it up. I'm not prepared to be in that sort of situation. So it was, how could I have this really difficult conversation, open and honest, but kind and respectful? And, well, does this work? Right? If I come from that position, can I have a really scary conversation with my fellow director that could throw it all out of the window? And it's to Phil's credit that he heard it and acknowledged his position in it. And I think for me, it demonstrated I can have difficult conversations with Phil. And, you know, and our relationship in that, therefore, this 3 years has deepened incredibly because of having that really absolutely scary conversation early on. And I think we're both able to speak to each other, I say respectfully, and you know, it's not shouting or loud words. It's just the stuff you need to hear said in a kind and respectful way.
And that is mostly around, I mean, to be clear, this incident 3 years ago, I did not behave at my best. I dropped out of communication because I didn't want to say what I needed to say. So, you know, it was completely me in the wrong. And I knew that when the conversation, Terry, started, I thought, yeah, I was wrong. And we have to find a way of me not only apologizing, but recognizing that was a change that needed to be made. But we still have conversations. We had a conversation actually last week about boundaries, and this was boundaries on time. And this was started by me, because I could see something creeping around the corner that was going to impact on my singing time. Nope, not having that. So you know, all people need to set boundaries, you know, and businesses need to set boundaries, don't they? And setting boundaries is a really tough conversation, because they're the boundary you want, and they're very likely not to be the boundary the other person wants. So that's a tough conversation for people to have, boundaries.
And just to sort of bring it back in terms of the business side, so that both of you very clear in terms of how you're using your values and principles to work together and use that on a day-to-day basis to keep you focused. But all businesses need processes and systems. Do you have any ways of working together to ensure that you're picking the right thing to move forward?
So right now, we have our third version of a to-do list for this year. I say third version because we started with one at the beginning of the year, and then certain things happened, and then it got changed and whatnot. And the third version that we've got now is as a result of the event we were doing in September being postponed. And how do you bring forward things that you were going to do next year to fill in the gap? And so our starting point has always been, I'm kind of an ideas person, and Phil will make a note of the things that I've said. And then we come together and we look at that list, and then it gets categorized and grouped. And when we were doing that last week, it was, there's enough on the list here now. There's enough categorized. And almost, if there's anything else going on that list, something has to go off. Yeah. And I surrendered. I mean, I know I needed to do this. So in that sense, it's not a big thing. But recognizing Phil's very, very good at managing his time. And therefore, one of the things he's taught me is to be able to be more mindful of my time. So it gets to, what's done going to look like, Terry? Right. If we're going to achieve this against this timeline, because it's a list of to-dos against a timeline, you know, what is it going to look like? And it might be not as perfect as it would have been if we had longer, but given what we have to do, it'll look like this. And that just, I think, being able to bounce ideas off each other in terms of, this is what we want to achieve, But what will it look like? We can both have that conversation. And I don't think we've ever come to a point where either one of us feels as though the other person's point of view has trumped the others. We've always found that magical kind of third position that we both feel we can work with.
Okay, excellent. So, describing your product is a sort of an accreditation. I personally more than that in terms of what it does for businesses. So, you're trying to get it into 1 million businesses in terms of doing that. Give us a description. What really drives you crazy about accreditation businesses or human business? And if you had a magic wand, what would you change to make it more successful?
Yeah, if I had a magic wand, I would stop people being able to just buy accreditations for anything off the shelf. Doesn't matter what it is. So I would make it so that you had to walk the walk. Whatever it was the talk was about, you had to walk it. So no, right, there's 1,200 quid. You've now got a badge to go on your letterhead for the rest of your life. Carry on doing whatever you like. No, that would be my magic wand to get rid of. Terry?
Yeah, I agree with that one. Walk the walk. I think the other one is probably an interpretation of what accreditation means. Everybody's got a different understanding of what accreditation means. And to be honest, I wish there was a different word we could use. Answers on a postcard. It was this, we just wanted to feel as though this care label, I mean, first of all, we had the term care label, but it's like, what does it mean? Right? We want to give business owners a care label, like the swing tag on clothes that says, handle with care. Shapes and colors may vary. What do you do with things that you care about, that you want to look after, that you want to protect? That should be your people. I mean, in a previous life, I was a senior manager in HSBC at the time when the old personnel department got a place on the board by rebranding themselves human resource. And I think that idea of a resource, that our humans are a resource, well, if that's true, we don't treat them like the greatest resource we're supposed to be, right? They're the only resource that isn't an asset on a balance sheet.
No, it's
right?
a cost.
They don't exist on a balance sheet. If anything, they're a liability, and they only appear on the P&L as an expense. So I think that's why we run an accreditation. But I feel as though we're on a mission to advocate for a different way of doing business. And if that appeals to people, then go through the accreditation, because that's the gateway to becoming a part of the community, a part of the marketplace, because we don't want people in the marketplace who are talking the talk but not walking the walk.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Granger?
Yeah, very good. Yes, thank you very much. Well, Phil, Terry, fantastic conversation. It's always a great conversation with you guys every time we meet in terms of that. Amazing story in terms of what you've done over the last few years to build your care label, the whole model and how it works together to really deliver in a business the safe space for people to be able to grow and to nurture and to become really successful, and that whole structure that you've built around that, which then builds into a community of businesses that can help each other because they're all in the same place in terms of doing that. And the narrative of how you use the values that you both teach other people in terms of get them to understand, but how you use those values within your business to help it grow and to where you've got to is absolutely fantastic. So some really fantastic points in there. So we always finish off with a little quick fire round. Some just short questions, first things that come to answer. Okay, so here we go. If you would go back to the younger you, what advice would you give yourself?
Trust yourself. Trust yourself.
don't sweat. Don't sweat the small stuff, the big stuff. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Which books do you recommend?
Oh, my inspiration as a child was Dickens. I read a lot of Dickens, and it was only as an adult that I realized that was actually social commentary. So anything like that, I love.
Super. Which podcast do you recommend?
I don't watch podcasts unless Terry sends them over. So the one that he sent me of Stephen Bartlett, I've watched a couple of his, and yeah, I really like the way that he talks. So that's the one I've watched most. I've also watched a bit of Rangan Chatterjee, and I like what he says. But basically, Terry says, have a look at this, and I have a look at it.
Okay, excellent. Terry, which books would you recommend?
If I'm honest, I'm not a big book reader. It's one of my development areas. So the books that has probably made the biggest difference to me is a book called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav. And it's about an evolving consciousness in the way in which we as human beings need to start communicating to ourselves and to others.
Brilliant. Which podcast would you recommend?
I listen to 3 religiously. The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, I mentioned earlier. Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, and Adam Grant's Work Life. Brilliant. And no matter what's happening in the week, I'll make sure I listen to those 3.
Excellent. So on your mobile phones, what apps do you use to make you productive?
Everything goes in the Google Calendar.
Yeah. I know things about Terry's life through the Google Calendar that even his wife doesn't know. So I mean, everything's in there and color coded to within an inch of its life.
Okay. Who has had the most influence on you as a business leader?
Ooh. Nobody famous. It would be the MD I worked for when I was a printer, I was a pressman, and this MD suggested that I might be a good salesman, and he taught me how to go out and have conversations with people. I was pretty good at it anyway, but he taught me how to do that, and he taught me lots of small stuff. I was only 21, and at the time, I do remember thinking, what on earth is he talking about? 10 years later, I realized what a fantastic mentor he'd been. I didn't have the opportunity to thank him, but, I've had 3 or 4 people in my working life who very often unknown to me mentored me and got me to where I am now. So they're not famous. I can name them, but you won't know them.
Interesting. Mine similarly isn't a famous person. And they're the biggest influence because they hurt me at the time the most. They almost destroyed me, if I'm honest. And what hurt was that they were an ally of mine until they got promoted to be my boss. And I remember a time where I literally had to work until 2:00 in the morning to finish a project. And I left a note on his desk saying, finish at 2, I'll be in at 10. Normally you're in at 8. And when I got there, he called me in. He said, we don't do flexi time. And I said, I finished at 8 o'clock. I finished at 2:00. Who asked you to? And it was, well, nobody. It just had to be done. Well, if you managed your team better, you wouldn't have had to. And he taught me in that pain, actually 2 things. One, how not to talk to people, and how not to acknowledge what was being done, but also to manage my time better and recognize if I do something, I do it because I want to, not because I feel I have to.
Brilliant. And then the very final question is, how can people get hold of you? How can they acquire? And you talk about an event coming up in January, so please let us know.
So Everything is on the Human Business website, so thehumanbusiness.co.uk. We run a monthly public workshop online. That's on the second Tuesday of every month. And the big event is a well-being and future of work event that's being sponsored by Harrison Clark Rickaby, which will be on the 11th of January, physical event in Cheltenham.
Brilliant. Well, Phil, Terry, thank you very much for this conversation. It's always inspiring to talk with you guys. And I'm sure our listeners will get a huge amount out of this discussion.
Granger, it's a pleasure talking to you. And if any of your listeners want to reach out and, as I mentioned earlier, challenge us or start a conversation, genuinely, really open to just having conversations with people who feel some resonance to this idea that we need to start taking care of our people as well as growing our businesses sustainably.
Yes, and you can start that process by taking care of yourself. So take care of yourself, give yourself permission to be human. And yes, we'd love to talk to anybody. We're very open.
Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.